Before you hear a single shot, before you feel the tremble of a helicopter or the cold weight of a rifle, I need you to understand something. This is not a story about destiny. It's not about a chosen one who was born to save the world. It's about a woman who found out her entire life. Every fear, every sleepless night, every moment she thought she was broken was actually a blueprint. Someone wrote the code for me before I had a name. And for 26 years, I thought my instincts were just that. Instincts. They weren't. They were a program. But here's the twist. No one tells you about being engineered for leadership. The people who designed you don't get to decide what you lead or who you become. That part is still yours. So hold on, because the first time I died on the operating table, I was 3 days old. And the second time, you're about to live through it with me. The first time I killed a man, I was more worried about the dust on my boots than the blood on my hands. That's not bravado. That's how the brain rewires itself when you've been awake for 47 hours, and the only thing keeping you vertical is the burn of caffeine gum and the quiet hum of a drone feed in your earpiece. The dust was a problem because it meant we'd been spotted. Talc white and thick as powdered bones, it rose from the valley floor in lazy plumes every time we shifted weight. We were supposed to be ghosts. Ghosts don't leave footprints, and they certainly don't kick up geological evidence. Rook, if you shuffle your feet one more time, I'm going to use your spine as a climbing rope, whispered Sergeant Nina Voss from my 6 o'clock. Her voice was gravel wrapped in silk, a contralto that could soothe a crying child or freeze a century's blood. Right now, it was doing both to me. I froze mid-step, my left boot hovering 2 inches above a patch of loose scree. Sorry, Sergeant. Stop apologizing. Start calculating. She didn't need to specify what. The numbers were already running behind my eyes like a ticker tape. Distance to the target building, 342 meters. Wind speed, 11 knots east-northeast. Number of hostiles confirmed via thermals, 6. Number unconfirmed, unknown. Time until the next patrol sweep, for minutes, 11 seconds. I'd always been good with numbers. Too good, my mother used to say, tapping my temple with a fond but worried finger. You think in spreadsheets, baby girl. I thought she meant it as a compliment. Later, I'd learn it was a side effect. Wrench, status on that fence. I asked, voice barely a breath into the bone conduction. Mike specialist Marcus Wrench. Okonkwo was our demolition and tech specialist, a lanky man from Chicago who could hotwire a Soviet air tank with a paperclip and sheer spite. He was also currently lying flat on his belly 20 meters to my left, working on a chain-link fence that was supposed to be electrified. Supposed to be. Generator's dead, he whispered back, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Either they forgot to pay the bill, or someone sabotaged it 6 months ago. Rust on the terminals says negligence, not enemy action. We're clear. Never trust clear, said Doc Halima Al-Jamil, our team medic, and the only person I knew who could stitch a femoral artery while discussing the philosophical merits of baklava. She was tucked behind a boulder with our sniper, her medical kit splayed open like a metal butterfly. Clear as a lie the universe tells you before it punches you in the throat. Poetic muttered Voss. Move. We moved. 3 steps, pause. 3 steps, pause. The rhythm was older than any of us. A predator's crawl perfected by every infantry squad since the first caveman picked up a sharp rock. I was point man, which was insane because I was also the ranking officer. Second Lieutenant Mirako, age 26, 4 feet 11 inches of questionable authority and very real firepower. The promotion board had called me precociously composed. My team called me boss, sometimes with affection, sometimes with the exasperated fondness you'd give a particularly aggressive chihuahua. I reached the outer wall of the target building, a low, concrete structure that had once been a schoolhouse before the warlord's men turned it into a detention center. Intelligence said they were holding 3 aid workers inside. Intelligence said a lot of things. Intelligence had also told us the fence would be live. I pressed my back against the wall and signaled. Voss took position opposite me, covering the north approach. Wrench moved to the eastern corner with a breaching charge the size of a deck of cards. Doc stayed back with the sniper, Corporal Tessa Ghost Aragon, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in the 3 months I'd known her, but could put a round through a coin at 800 meters while chewing gum. Ghost's voice came through the mic, soft as a moth's wing. 2 hostiles inside the front room, 1 at the rear exit, 3 more on the second floor. They're not military. No body armor. AKs only. Civilians? Doc asked. No. Fighters. Just poor ones. That was the moral dilemma, wasn't it? They weren't soldiers. They were farmers with guns, conscripted by a man who called himself a general, but couldn't spell Geneva Convention. And I was about to order my team to put them down. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Just one. In that darkness, I saw my mother's face. Not as she was now, gray and fading in a hospice bed, but as she was when I was 7, teaching me chess on a rainy afternoon. You see patterns, Mira. Not just moves. The whole board. That's your gift. I opened my eyes. Wrench, soft breach on the front door. Gas first, then entry. I want them unconscious, not dead, if possible. Ghost, if anyone raises a weapon, you have permission to drop them. Voss, you're with me on the left. Doc, stay on wrenches 6. Roger, boss. 4 voices, 1 answer. The breach was silent. Wrench had rigged the charge with a hydraulic pressure system that popped the door inward without the traditional explosive roar. Canisters of CS gas rolled into the room like metal eggs, hissing their chemical lullaby. I heard coughing, shouting in a language I only half understood. Then, we were through the door. The first hostile came at me out of the haze, arms outstretched, eyes streaming tears. He was young, 17 maybe. His AK wasn't even raised. He was just trying to run. My rifle came up on instinct, the muzzle seeking his center mass like a compass finding north. I didn't fire. I swept my leg, took his knees out, and he went down hard. Voss was past me in an instant, cuffing his hands behind his back with a zip tie. Room secure, she said. Upstairs, Ghost fired once. A single, sharp crack that echoed through the building like a slammed door. Then silence. Rear exit neutralized, Ghost reported. He had a grenade. Safety pin was out. My heart didn't race. That was the thing that scared me most. My pulse stayed at a steady 72 beats per minute, same as it had been during the approach. Same as it was now, standing over a crying teenager while my sniper put a hole in someone's skull. The numbers were calm. The numbers were always calm. We found the aid workers in the basement. 3 women, 2 from Médecins Sans Frontières, and 1 from the Red Cross, huddled in a corner behind a pile of empty ammunition crates. They were dehydrated, frightened, but alive. The tallest one, a Swede with a streak of gray in her braids, grabbed my arm and said, "Thank God. Thank God." "Don't thank him," I said. "Thank my medic. She's the one who figured out your location from a blurry satellite photo and a half-eaten protein bar wrapper." Doc was already working, checking vitals, distributing water, murmuring reassurances in 3 languages. Wrench secured the prisoners. Voss swept the building a second time, looking for surprises. Ghost kept her scope on the road outside. And I stood in the middle of it all, feeling nothing. That was the lie I told myself later, that I felt nothing. But the truth was worse. I felt right. Like every gear in my head had finally clicked into place. Like I'd been built for this exact moment. The extraction was messy. A Toyota pickup with a heavy machine gun bolted to the bed, roared down the valley road 10 minutes after we called for the hello. Ghost took out the gunner with a shot that passed through his shoulder and into the engine block. The truck swerved, crashed into a ditch, and the remaining fighters scattered into the hills. By the time the MH-60 touched down in a tornado of dust and rotor wash, the only thing left to do was load up and leave. On the flight back, Voss sat across from me, cleaning her fingernails with the tip of a knife. "You didn't shoot the kid." It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. Why? I thought about it. Because he wasn't aiming at me. He was trying to get out. Killing him wouldn't have changed the mission. Would have been easier. Since what do we do easy? She looked at me for a long moment, then something shifted in her expression. Respect, maybe. Or just acceptance. "You're different, boss. I can't figure out if that's a good thing or not." "Join the club," I said. "Membership's free. The existential dread is extra." Wrench laughed from the other side of the cabin. Doc smiled without looking up from her patient. Even Ghost's lips twitched. That was the moment I thought I understood my purpose. I was a leader. A good one, maybe. Not because I was brave or strong or particularly wise, but because I could see the board. I could calculate the odds and make the call and live with the consequences. That was the gift. 2 weeks later, my mother died. I was on leave at the time, sitting beside her hospital bed in Bethesda, holding a hand that felt like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. The cancer had spread to her spine, her liver, her brain. She hadn't recognized me for the last 3 days. But in the final hour, Her eyes cleared, and she looked at me with something like terror. "Mira," she whispered, "there's something you need to know. About the hospital. When you were born." "Sure," I said. "Save your strength." "No." Her grip tightened with surprising force. "They told me it was a study. A program for gifted infants. Genetic screening. I signed the papers because they said it would give you a better life. Better brain function. Better health. But that wasn't all of it, baby. That wasn't." She started coughing. A nurse came in, pushed me aside, adjusted the morphine drip. By the time the coughing stopped, my mother was asleep again. She never woke up. The funeral was small. Military honors, because my father had been a colonel before he died in a training accident when I was 3. Folding flags. Taps played by a young corporal with chapped lips. I stood at attention through all of it, my spine straight, my face neutral. The numbers were running again. Number of people in attendance, 42. Number of times I blinked during the 21-gun salute, 0. Number of tears, also 0. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled my medical records from the military secure server. It took me 11 minutes to crack the encryption, a skill I'd never been taught but somehow knew. The file was thin. Too thin. Birth weight, 7 pounds 2 ounces. APGAR scores, normal. A note about a brief respiratory event at 3 days old, resolved without complications. But there was a second file, buried in a server I'd never seen before, protected by a firewall that would have made the NSA wince. I broke through it in 40 minutes, and what I found made my steady 72 beats per minute finally spike. The file was labeled Project Hyperion. My name was on it. So it was a list of genetic modifications I couldn't fully understand. Sequences and markers and acronyms that meant nothing to me, but painted a terrifying picture. Enhanced neural plasticity, optimized adrenal response, accelerated pattern recognition, elevated pain tolerance, reduced fear response, leadership gene clusters artificially inserted into my genome before my first breath. I wasn't gifted. I wasn't precocious. I was designed. I sat in the dark for a long time, the glow of the laptop painting my face blue. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. A dog barked. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that my entire identity had just been reduced to a series of laboratory notations. The phone rang. I answered on autopilot. "Boss." It was Voss. "We've got a situation. New orders. They're sending us back out in 12 hours. Target is high value. I can't say more on this line." "Understood," I said. My voice was steady. "Of course it was. You okay? You sound off." I looked at the file on my screen. Project Hyperion. My whole life, a fucking experiment. "I'm fine," I said. "Send me the coordinates." She hesitated. Then, "Roger." "And boss? Whatever it is, you're still the same person you were yesterday." "Am I?" The line went dead. I closed the laptop, packed my bag, checked my weapon, and somewhere in the cold, algorithmic heart of my engineered brain, a new calculation began to run. Not about tactics or odds or enemy positions. About something far more dangerous. Someone had made me. Someone had plans for me. And I was going to find out who, and make them regret ever thinking they could write my story for me. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. I'd been back on base for 3 hours, long enough to shower, eat a protein bar I didn't taste, and stare at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror until I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The genetic report was burned into my memory. Every codon, every manipulated sequence, every cold calculation written into the blueprint of my body. I'd memorized the names of the scientists involved. There were 7 of them. 3 were still alive. 1 worked for the Pentagon. 1 had retired to a vineyard in Chile. And the lead researcher, a Dr. Eris Thorne, had vanished 10 years ago under circumstances the file described as operational relocation. That meant he was either dead or hiding. Either way, I intended to find him. But first, the mission. Colonel Brenda Shaw ran the briefing. She was a broad-shouldered woman with a jawline that could cut glass and the kind of stare that made lieutenants check their bootlaces. She didn't like me. I knew this because the numbers told me so. The way her pupils dilated when she looked at me, the slight backward tilt of her torso, the way she always said my rank like it was a mild insult. "Listen up," Shaw said, tapping a satellite image on the wall screen. 24 hours ago, a CIA asset codenamed Echo, was captured by a splinter faction of al-Shabaab in northeastern Somalia. Echo has access to a list of every undercover operative in the Horn of Africa. If that list gets out, we lose a decade of work and a lot of good people. The image showed a compound, larger than our last target, with walls that looked newly reinforced. Guard towers at each corner. Vehicle tracks leading to a main gate. A well in the center of the courtyard, which meant they had their own water supply. This wasn't a schoolhouse. This was a fortress. Extraction window is 48 hours, Shaw continued. After that, they move Echo to a secondary location, and we lose track. Your team is the only asset close enough to get there in time. You'll insert via Halo Drop, 20 clicks east of the compound. Overland approach on foot. No drones, no air support after insertion. This is a ghost op. If you're captured, the Department of Defense will deny all knowledge. Standard Tuesday. Wrench muttered beside me. Doc elbowed him. Shaw's eyes flicked to me. Questions, Lieutenant. I had about 100. How many hostiles? What was Echo's real name? Who was the Splinter faction's leader? What was the failsafe if Echo was already dead? But I only asked one. What's the ROE? Rules of engagement. The difference between a clean mission and a war crime. Deadly force authorized, Shaw said. No prisoners. Something cold settled in my stomach. No prisoners meant we weren't just rescuing Echo. We were eliminating witnesses. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was an erasure. Boss caught my eye across the table. Her expression was unreadable, but I saw the tiny muscle in her jaw twitch. She'd figure it out too. After the briefing, we gathered in the equipment bay. Wrench was already laying out our gear: chutes, oxygen systems, night vision goggles, weapons. He worked with the focused efficiency of a man who'd been doing this since he was 18. He was 29 now, 11 years of war, and the only scar he had was a burn mark on his left hand from a faulty detonator in Fallujah. You're quiet, boss, Doc said, sitting on an ammunition crate and checking her medical kit. Quieter than usual. That's either contemplation or constipation. Either way, I've got pills for it. I'm Fine. You said that on the phone last night. You sounded like a robot when you said it then, too. Ghost was already in the corner, assembling her sniper rifle with her back to the room. She didn't turn around, but I saw her pause just for a second. She was listening. I sat down on a crate across from Document. The metal was cold through my fatigues. Have you ever found out something about yourself that made you question everything you thought you knew? Doc's expression softened. She was 42, old for this work, with crow's feet around her eyes and a gold band on her left finger that she never talked about. She'd seen more death than anyone should, and somehow she'd kept her heart intact. I envied that. Every day, she said. I found out my father wasn't my biological father when I was 30. Found out my brother was dealing drugs to kids when I was 35. Found out I still loved him anyway when I was 36. The truth doesn't change who you are, Mira. It just gives you new information to work with. What if the information says you're not even a real person? Just a product? The room went very quiet. Even Ghost stopped moving. Wrench looked up from his gear. Boss, you want to run that by us again? I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but now that I had, I couldn't take it back. And maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I was tired of carrying the weight of Project Hyperion alone. So I told them. Not everything. Not the names of the scientists or the classified server or the fact that I'd hacked into a Pentagon database. But enough. Enough to explain the too fast calculations, the absent fear, the way my heart never raced, even when it should have. Enough to make them understand that the person giving them orders wasn't entirely human. When I finished, Voss was the first to speak. So you're saying someone built you in a lab? Like a better mousetrap? Something like that. She snorted. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I once heard a private suggest we use a slingshot against a mortar team. Sergeant, no, listen. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin from a knife fight in Kandahar. I've served with a lot of officers. Some were good. Most were mediocre. A few were brilliant. You know what they all had in common? They chose to be there. They worked for it. They made mistakes and learned from them. If some scientist tweaked your genes before you were born, that's a head start, not a destiny. You still made the calls. You still put your ass on the line. You still sat with that dying kid in the basement of that schoolhouse and held his hand while Doc patched his leg. A program didn't do that. You did. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. Wrench walked over and dropped the helmet in my lap. Put this on. We've got a mission. You can have your existential crisis on the plane, preferably quietly, because I need a nap. Doc stood up and stretched. What wrench means is we've got your back. Engineered or not. You're our leader. That's not a genetic accident. That's earned. Ghost said nothing. But as she turned to face me, she held up her right hand and made a small gesture, thumb and forefinger forming a circle, the other 3 fingers raised. An old signal. I see you. I put on the helmet. The halo jump was a nightmare. We went out at 30,000 feet, the air so cold it felt like needles against every inch of exposed skin. The night sky was a black ocean, the stars frozen points of light that offered no warmth. I counted to 10 after the jump master signal, then pulled my ripcord. The canopy opened with a violent jerk that snapped my teeth together. Below me, the coast of Somalia was a dark smudge against the lighter darkness of the Indian Ocean. No lights, no civilization, just miles of scrubland and rock and the occasional flicker of a cooking fire from a nomadic encampment. Somewhere out there, 20 clicks to the west, a CIA asset was waiting to be saved or silenced. We landed hard. I rolled, came up with my rifle ready, and did a head count by feel alone in the pitch dark. Voss to my right. Wrench, 10 meters behind. Doc, already unpacking her kit. Ghost, invisible until she whispered, on your 6. We buried the chutes in a shallow wadi, covering them with sand and rocks. Then we started walking. The approach took 14 hours. We moved at night, rested in the heat of the day, pressed into shallow depressions or beneath overhangs of rock. The terrain was brutal. Sharp stones that cut through boot soles, thorn bushes that snagged uniforms, a sun that turned the world into a furnace by 9 in the morning. I rationed water in precise 2-ounce increments, calculating consumption against distance against expected exertion. The numbers ran themselves. On the second night, we reached the ridge overlooking the compound. Ghost found a position on a rocky outcropping, her ghillie suit blending into the shale so completely that I lost her even when I knew exactly where she was. The rest of us huddled in a shallow depression, passing around a tube of electrolyte paste and speaking in whispers. 3 guard towers, Voss said, glassing the compound with her binos. 1 at each corner. Machine gun nests in 2 of them. The other 2 have spotlights, but no guns. Weakest point is the east wall, I said. The construction is different, newer. They probably ran out of money or materials. It's thinner there. How can you tell from here? Wrench asked. The color of the mortar. East wall is lighter. Different batch of cement. Lower quality. He stared at me. That's insane. That's pattern recognition. Apparently, I was built for it. Still insane. Doc tapped my shoulder. Movement at the main gate. Vehicle. A pickup truck rolled out of the compound, its headlights cutting twin tunnels through the darkness. It turned south and accelerated, kicking up a rooster tail of dust. I counted the figures in the back. 4. Armed. Reinforcements or supply run, I said. Either way, they're down 4 fighters. That brings the estimated total to 22 if Ghost's earlier count was accurate. 23, Ghost said in my ear. 1 just came out on the roof. He's smoking. 23, I amended. Hostile to friendly ratio, almost 6 to 1. Not great. We've had worse, Voss said. When? That time in Mosul. Remember the sewer? I try not to. We planned the assault in 45 minutes. Breach from the east wall, using wrenches shaped charges to create a hole just wide enough for 2 people to pass at a time. Voss and I would go first, clearing the courtyard. Doc would follow with wrench, securing a path to the building where Echo was being held. Ghost would provide overwatch, neutralizing the machine gun nests before they could fire. Timing was everything. The patrols changed every 4 hours, which gave us a 10-minute window when the guards on the east wall would be at their most tired and inattentive. We'd hit at 0300, the deepest part of the night, when even the most disciplined fighters struggled to stay alert. Any questions? I asked. Yeah, Wrench said. What's Echo's real name? I'd like to know who I'm dying for. I'd looked it up before we left. The file was sealed, but I'd cracked it in 90 seconds. Elena Vasquez, CIA paramilitary officer. She's been undercover for 3 years. Before that, she was a captain in Army intelligence. A captain, Voss repeated. So she's one of us. She was one of us. Now she's a prisoner. Let's not keep her waiting. We moved into position at 0200. The east wall was even weaker than I'd thought. I could see hairline cracks in a mortar from 50 meters away. Wrench placed the charges with surgical precision, then crawled back to our staging point. At 0255, Ghost fired her first shot. The sound was a soft thwack, barely louder than a hand clap. One of the machine gun nests went silent. At 0256, she fired again. Second nest. At 0257, the charges detonated. The east wall crumbled inward with a roar that echoed off the surrounding hills like thunder. I was through the breach before the dust settled. My rifle up, my world narrowed to a tunnel of green-tinted night vision. The courtyard was chaos. Men shouting in Somali, running in half a dozen different directions. I dropped the first one I saw, a man with an AK and a headlamp, raising his weapon toward the breach. One round to the chest. He fell. I didn't feel anything. Voss was beside me, firing in controlled pairs. To my left, Wrench was laying down suppressive fire while Doc dragged a wounded fighter out of the line of fire. I saw her check his pulse, shake her head, move on. No prisoners, Shaw had said. But Doc couldn't help herself. She was a healer first, a soldier second. That was why I trusted her. Building entrance, 11 o'clock. Voss shouted. I saw it. A metal door, half open, with lights spilling out. 2 guards flanking it, both firing blind into the courtyard. I dropped to one knee, took a breath, and put a round through the left guard's throat. The right guard turned to run, and Voss dropped him with a double tap to the back. We reached the door. I kicked it open and went through. The interior was a maze of narrow hallways and small rooms, lit by bare bulbs hanging from frayed wires. The air smelled of sweat, cooking oil, and something else, copper and salt. Blood. Recent blood. Echo. I shouted. U.S. Army. Call out. A voice answered from somewhere ahead. Weak but steady. Here. Back room. Hurry. We found her in what looked like an old classroom. Desks had been pushed against the walls. In the center, tied to a wooden chair, was a woman who might have been 40, but looked 60. Her face was bruised, her lips split, her right hand swollen to twice its normal size. But her eyes were clear, and she was smiling. Took you long enough, Elena Vasquez said. Traffic was hell, I replied, cutting her bindings. That was when the second explosion hit. The world went sideways. I slammed into a desk, felt something crack in my ribs. Dust and debris filled the air. When I looked up, half the ceiling was gone, and I could see stars through the hole. They blew the armory, Wrench said over the radio. His voice was strained. I'm pinned at the east breach. Doc's with me. She's hit. How bad? Grazed her arm. She says she's fine, but she's using words I've never heard before, so I think she's lying. I grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward what was left of the door. Voss was ahead of us, laying down cover fire. Ghost, status on those reinforcements. Incoming, Ghost said. 3 vehicles, ETA 4 minutes. Boss, you need to exfil now. Working on it. We made it to the courtyard. Bodies everywhere, some of them ours. I saw Doc pressing a field dressing to her own arm while Wrench fired over a low wall. Voss was reloading, her face streaked with dust and sweat. And then I saw the third guard tower. The one Ghost hadn't neutralized because it didn't have a machine gun. But it had something else. A man with a rocket-propelled grenade, already aiming at the breach where we'd entered. I had 2 seconds, maybe less. I didn't think. I just moved. The RPG streaked toward the breach like a comet made of bad intentions. I tackled Elena behind a low wall of sandbags, covering her body with mine. The explosion hit a split second later, a wall of heat and pressure that lifted me off the ground and slammed me down again. My ears rang. My vision blurred. Something warm and wet trickled down the side of my face. Voss. Voss's voice, distant and muffled, like she was calling from underwater. Boss, get up. I pushed myself to my knees. Elena was alive. I saw her chest moving, her eyes wide but focused. The wall had taken most of the blast. We were lucky. Lucky or engineered for blast tolerance. I didn't know which anymore. Ghost, I coughed. That RPG team. Take them out. Already did, she said. But boss, those vehicles just topped the ridge. They're fast. You have maybe 90 seconds before they're on top of you. I did the math. 85 seconds until contact. 3 vehicles, probably carrying 15 to 20 fighters. Our position, compromised, surrounded, with 1 wounded operative, one wounded medic, and ammunition running low. The exfil chopper was still 20 minutes out. We weren't going to make it. That was the moment when the fear should have hit. The real fear, the kind that freezes your lungs and turns your legs to jelly. But all I felt was a cold clarity, like someone had poured ice water through my veins. The numbers were still running. The pattern was still visible. And I saw something that looked like a way out. "Wrench," I said. "The armory. Where was it?" "West side of the compound." "What? How much explosives are left in there?" He paused. "If the first explosion didn't cook everything off, maybe a lot." "What?" "Because we're going to make them think we're dead." Boss caught on first. A secondary explosion. Collapse the buildings. Make it look like we went up with the armory. Then, we exfilled during the confusion. I finished. "Ghost, can you trigger the armory from your position?" A pause. "Then, if I put a round through the fuel storage tank next to it, yes." "But boss, that's a big fireball. You'll need to be clear." "How clear?" 200 meters. Minimum. We were 50 meters from the armory. And the vehicles were 60 seconds out. "Everybody up," I said. "We're moving to the west wall. Now." We ran. Elena between me and Voss, Doc supporting herself, Wrench covering our rear. Ghost laid down suppressive fire, picking off fighters who tried to flank us. I heard screams, return fire, the whine of bullets past my ear. None of it touched me. The numbers kept me safe, calculating trajectories, predicting enemy movements, plotting a path through the chaos. We reached the west wall with 30 seconds to spare. There was a gap where the original explosion had weakened the concrete. I pushed Elena through, then Doc, then Wrench. Voss went last, turning to fire a final burst at the lead vehicle, now crashing through the main gate. Ghost now. The shot was perfect. It always was with her. The fuel tank went up with a roar that shook the ground, followed a second later by the armory itself, a chain of detonations that turned the western half of the compound into a crater. The shockwave hit us like a giant's hand, throwing me to the ground. Heat washed over my back. For a terrible moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the pressure passed, and I rolled over to see the sky lit orange and red, the remains of the compound collapsing in on itself. "Is everyone alive?" I shouted. One by one, they answered. Voss, Wrench, Duck, Elena, Ghost from her perch on the ridge. We had made it. The extraction was ugly. We walked for 2 hours through darkness and rough terrain, Elena leaning heavily on my shoulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The chopper picked us up at a dry riverbed, its rotors kicking up sand that stung our eyes and filled our mouths. We climbed aboard, and only when the wheels left the ground did I allow myself to sit down. Doc bandaged Elena's hand. Wrench passed out water bottles. Voss leaned her head back against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. Ghost sat in the corner, already cleaning her rifle. And I sat in the middle of them, my engineered heart beating at a steady 72 beats per minute, and felt nothing. No, that's a lie. I felt something. I felt tired. Tired of the numbers. Tired of the calculations. Tired of being the one who had to make the calls, who had to carry the weight, who had to pretend that the cold clarity in my head was a gift instead of curse. Elena Vasquez reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were swollen, but her grip was strong. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." It was a team effort. No, it was you. I've been in this game for 18 years. I've seen a lot of leaders, but you saw things before they happened. You knew where to be, when to move. That's not training. That's something else. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Recognition. "What's your real name?" I asked. Not Elena. Not Vasquez. The name before the cover. She hesitated. Then, Elena Koj. Your mother was my sister. The world stopped. The numbers in my head went silent. For the first time in my life, there was no calculation, no pattern, no prediction. Just a vast, empty white noise. "You're lying," I whispered. "I'm not. Your mother, my sister, she was part of Project Hyperion. Not as a subject, as a researcher. She helped design the genetic protocols. But when she found out what they were planning, the long-term goals, the applications, she stole the research and ran. She changed her name. Married your father. Had you? That's not possible. She was a teacher. She graded papers. She made casseroles. She was hiding from the people who ran the project. From Eris Thorne. He's still out there, Mira. And He's been looking for you your whole life. The chopper banked. The lights of the carrier group appeared on the horizon, a constellation of steel and fire on the dark water. Home, almost. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Elena. Aunt Elena squeezed my hand. Because Thorn knows you're active now. The mission tonight? It was a trap. Not for the asset. For you. He wanted to see what you could do. And you just showed him. The white noise in my head resolved into a single, terrifying pattern. The trap. The compromised intelligence. The convenient timing of the mission. The fact that Shaw had given us no prisoners ROE. She wasn't protecting national security. She was cleaning up loose ends. And that was the biggest loose end of all. The colonel, I said. Shaw. She's working for him. Elena nodded. And now she knows you survived. Which means he knows. You have maybe 12 hours before they try again. You need to disappear. Where? Somewhere they can't find you. Somewhere off the grid. I know a place. But you have to decide now. Stay and play their game, or run and live to fight another day. The chopper touched down. The ramp lowered, and the lights of the carrier washed over us, too bright, too exposing. On the flight deck, I saw Colonel Shaw waiting, her face a mask of professional concern. Behind her, 2 men in civilian clothes. Neither was carrying a weapon I could see, but their jackets bulged in ways that told me otherwise. Boss stepped up beside me. Boss, what's the call? I looked at my team. Wrench, exhausted but ready. Doc, already pulling fresh bandages from her kit. Ghost, invisible in the shadows, but I knew she was watching. And Voss, solid and steady, waiting for my order. The numbers were running again. But this time, they weren't telling me about angles or trajectories or probabilities. They were telling me something else. Something I'd always known deep down beneath the genetic code and the enhanced neural pathways and the carefully engineered leadership clusters. I wasn't a product. I wasn't a program. I was a person, and persons get to choose. Voss, I said, take the team. Get Elena to medical. Don't let anyone talk to her without me present. What about you? I stepped off the ramp onto the flight deck. The wind was strong here, whipping my hair across my face. I walked toward Shaw, my boots ringing on the metal, my shadow stretching long behind me. I'm going to have a conversation with the colonel. Shaw smiled as I approached. It didn't reach her eyes. Lieutenant, good to see you made it. We have a lot to debrief. We do, I said. But first, I need you to answer a question. Of course. I stopped 3 feet from her. Close enough to see the pulse in her throat, faster than it should have been. Close enough to smell the fear beneath her perfume. Who is Eris Thorn? And why does he want me dead? The smile vanished. The 2 men behind her reached inside their jackets. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My heart rate stayed at 72. I don't know what you're talking about, Shaw said. Yes, you do. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. His location, his operation, his endgame. Or I'm going to walk off this carrier, take my team, and go public with Project Hyperion. Every news outlet, every senator, every human rights organization I can find. And when the dust settles, you won't have a career, a pension, or a country that will claim you. Shaw's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. She'd expected the engineered soldier, the obedient leader, the good little weapon. She hadn't expected the woman. You can't do that, she whispered. Watch me. I turned my back on her and walked away. The 2 men started to move, but Voss was suddenly there, her rifle across her chest, her expression one of bored menace. Wrench and Doc flanked her, and somewhere on the carrier's superstructure, a laser appeared on Shaw's forehead. Ghost, making her position clear. We walked off the flight deck together. My team, my family. The only proof I needed that I was more than the sum of my genetic parts. Behind us, the ocean swallowed the night. Ahead, a new fight waited, one that couldn't be won with rifles and shaped charges. A fight for the truth. A fight for the right to define myself. I didn't know if I'd win. I didn't know if I'd survive. But for the first time in my life, the numbers didn't matter. The pattern didn't matter. Only the choice. And I chose to be free.